The billionaire pretended to be asleep. Then the maid's toddler melted his heart. Nathaniel Calloway lay perfectly still in the dark and pretended to be asleep. His heart was slamming against his ribs like it hadn't in 3 years. Not since the phone call. Not since the hospital hallway with the 2 bright lights and the doctor who couldn't look him in the eye. Someone was in his room. He could hear it, the soft creak of a small foot on the hardwood. A pause. Another step. Whoever it was moved the way a person moves when they're trying very hard not to be caught. Call security, some cold, practical part of his brain said. There is an intruder in your house. But he didn't move. He didn't open his eyes. Some other part of him, a part he'd locked away since the funeral, wanted to know what happened next more than he wanted to be safe. A small hand touched his cheek. It was warm. Impossibly small. Careful, the way you'd touch something you were afraid might break. Are you sad? A tiny voice whispered. Mama says sad people need someone to sit with them. Nate's chest went tight. He almost opened his eyes right then. Almost said, "Who are you? How did you get in here? Where is your mother?" A dozen questions any reasonable man would ask a stranger's child standing beside his bed at 2 in the morning in a house with a security system that cost more than most people's homes. Instead he lay there in the dark, eyes shut, and let a 3-year-old girl he had never met sit beside him for exactly 4 minutes. Then, as quietly as she'd come, she was gone. He opened his eyes to an empty room. For a moment he wondered if he'd dreamed it. Grief did strange things to a man's mind. The doctor had warned him that too. Then he saw it. On his nightstand, where nothing had been the night before, sat a paper flower. Clumsy. Crooked. Folded by hands too young to know how to fold anything well. He picked it up, and his hand was shaking. No child lived in this house. No child was allowed in this house. He had made sure of that himself, 3 years ago, when he couldn't stand the sound of small feet running anywhere near him. So who was she? And why, when he should have called security that instant, did some broken part of him only want to know one thing? Would she come back tomorrow night? Calloway Manor sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by hedges trimmed into perfect straight lines. From the outside it looked like something from a magazine. Inside, it was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. Nate had made it that way on purpose. 3 years ago, before the accident, he used to imagine what the house would sound like with a child in it. Running feet on the stairs. Laughter in the garden. His wife Claire used to stand at the kitchen window and say, "This house is waiting for someone, Nate. I can feel it." She never got to find out who that someone would be. The car crash took her, and it took the baby she was carrying, 6 months along. A little girl. They never got to name her. After that, Nate made one rule above all others. No children on the property. Not visiting grandchildren of the staff. Not neighborhood kids cutting through the garden, nothing. Mrs. Whitmore, who ran the household with the precision of a Swiss clock, had made sure every new hire understood this rule on their very first day. Which was why, when Sophia Reyes stood in the servants' entrance filling out her paperwork, she did not mention that she had a daughter. "You'll be doing the night shift," Mrs. Whitmore said, not looking up from her clipboard. 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Mr. Calloway keeps odd hours. You are not to disturb him. You are not to speak to him unless spoken to. Is that clear? Yes, Sophia's voice was steady, but her hands, folded in front of her, were not. She needed this job. She needed it the way a person needs air. 3 weeks ago she had packed one suitcase and her daughter's favorite blanket and left everything else behind, including a husband who had convinced most people that he was the kindest man in town. Only Sophia knew what he was like when the doors were closed. The manor's night shift paid well, and better than that, it came with a small room above the old carriage house, the last place, she prayed, that Marcus would ever think to look. There was only one problem. She had nowhere else to take her daughter. Lily Reyes was 3 years old, and she did not understand why they had left their old house, or why Mama cried quietly some nights when she thought Lily was asleep. She only understood that this new house was very big and very dark, and there was one window on the third floor that stayed lit every single night. "That's Mr. Calloway's room," Sophia told her, the first week, tucking Lily into the little cot in the carriage house. "You're not to go anywhere near it, baby. Promise me." "Why?" "Because it's the rule." Lily thought about this. 3-year-olds are very good at thinking about things adults tell them not to think about. "Is he sad?" she asked. Sophia paused, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "The light stays on. Sad people don't like the dark." Sophia didn't have an answer for that. She kissed her daughter's forehead and told her to sleep, and did not know that 4 nights later, while she scrubbed floors 2 hallways away, her daughter would slip out of the cot, walk the length of the east corridor in her bare feet, and push open a door she had been told never to touch. Nate noticed the flower every time he passed his nightstand. He told himself he should throw it away. Instead, he found himself picking it up sometimes, turning it over in his hands, studying the clumsy folds like they were a puzzle he needed to solve. He said nothing to Mrs. Whitmore. Not yet. But he did check the security footage. The manor had cameras in every hallway, an old habit from a threat years back, nothing to do with grief. Nate sat alone in his study and scrolled through the grainy black and white footage from the east corridor. And there, at 2:14 in the morning, was a small shape moving down the hall. Too small to be an adult. Moving with the careful, hesitant steps of a child who knew she wasn't supposed to be there. His pulse picked up. A child. In my house. He should have called Mrs. Whitmore immediately. Instead he watched the small shape reach his door, hesitate, and slip inside. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The second gift came 6 nights later. This time it was a drawing, folded in half, left on the same nightstand. Nate unfolded it carefully, the way you'd handle something fragile. 2 stick figures. One tall, one small. Holding hands. Above them, in careful, wobbling crayon letters that took him a moment to make out, were 2 words. My friend. Nate sat on the edge of his bed and stared at it for a long time. He had not cried since the funeral. He did not cry now, exactly. But something in his chest cracked open just slightly, like a window left unlatched. He thought about Claire's voice. This house is waiting for someone. He thought about the rule he had made 3 years ago, the rule that said no child would ever run through these halls again, because he could not bear it, and he thought about a small girl who had broken that rule 6 times now without anyone noticing, without anyone but him even knowing she existed. Whose is she? He needed to know. And there was only one place to start. He found Mrs. Whitmore's staff roster in his desk drawer and went through it name by name until he reached the newest hire. Sophia Reyes. Night housekeeping. Start date. 3 weeks ago. He found her in the East Wing supply room a little after midnight, folding linens, and something about the careful, exhausted way she moved told him this was a woman running from something. Mrs. Reyes. She startled so badly she nearly dropped the stack of towels. Mr. Calloway. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I need to ask you something. He kept his voice even. Calm. Not the voice of an employer about to fire someone, though he wasn't entirely sure yet what voice this was. Do you have a daughter? All the color left her face. Sir, I can explain. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket before she could finish. She glanced at the screen, and whatever she saw there made her hands start to shake. I have to take this, she said, already turning away, forgetting for a moment that her employer, the man whose rule she had broken, whose house she may have just cost herself a job in, was standing right there. She pressed the phone to her ear and walked toward the far end of the hallway, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper that carried further than she realized. Please, I told you not to call this number. A pause. Her whole body seemed to fold inward. He can't find us. Please. Don't tell him where we are. Nate stood frozen in the doorway, the drawing still folded in his coat pocket, and understood in that instant that whatever secret Sophia Reyes was hiding, it was far bigger and far more dangerous than a little girl sneaking into his room at night. Nate didn't fire her. He told himself later that he wasn't sure why, that a man in his position couldn't have strangers with secret children wandering his property, that it was a liability, a risk, 100 reasonable things his lawyers would tell him. But he had heard her voice on that phone call. "He can't find us." He knew what fear like that sounded like. He'd heard it in his own voice, once, in a hospital hallway, saying please, just let her be okay to a doctor who already knew the answer. So instead of calling Mrs. Whitmore, he waited until Sophia had composed herself and said only, "Your daughter was in my room last week." Sophia's whole body went rigid. "Sir, I'm so sorry, I told her never to. She left me a flower. And a drawing." He paused. "I kept both." Sophia stared at him like she wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. "I'm not going to report this," Nate said. "Not yet. But I need to understand what's happening in my own house." It took her 3 tries to find her voice. "Her name is Lily. She's 3. I didn't have anywhere else. The room they gave me, it's just for me, there's no childcare on this shift, and I couldn't afford." She stopped herself, ashamed of how much she'd already said. "And the phone call?" Something closed in her face, the way a door closes. "That's not something I can talk about, sir." Nate studied her a long moment. He recognized the look. It was the look of someone protecting a wound so deep that talking about it might tear it back open. "All right," he said quietly. "For now." He didn't understand why he did what he did next. He told himself it was curiosity. He told himself it was guilt, maybe, for the rule he'd made 3 years ago that had turned a mother and daughter into people who had to hide. But the truth was simpler than that, and harder to admit. He wanted to see her again. So the next night, instead of pretending to sleep, he left a small stuffed rabbit on his nightstand, the kind you'd find in any toy shop, plain and soft. He left his door slightly open. At 2:09 in the morning, he heard the small careful footsteps again. He kept his eyes shut. He heard a small gasp of delight at the rabbit, and then, very quietly, a small voice saying, "Thank you, Mr. Sleepy Man." He almost laughed. He hadn't almost laughed in 3 years. But not everyone in the house was asleep. Mrs. Whitmore had run Callaway Manor for 11 years, since before Nate's marriage, and she took her job as seriously as scripture. She had built her entire career on knowing everything that happened under that roof before Nate did. And in the last week, the East Corridor camera had picked up a small shape moving through the halls not once, but 4 times. She watched the footage in her office with her arms crossed, jaw tight. A child. On the property. Breaking the one rule Mr. Callaway ever asked me to enforce. She thought of the board meeting coming in 3 weeks, the merger vote that would either secure the company's future or hand control to shareholders who'd been circling Nate since Claire's death, waiting for any excuse to say he wasn't fit to lead. A scandal, even a small domestic one, could tip votes the wrong way. She had seen it happen to other men. She decided she would handle this herself, quietly, before it became Nate's problem. She found Sophia in the laundry room the next afternoon. "I know about your daughter," Mrs. Whitmore said, without preamble. "I know she's been in Mr. Callaway's room. This ends today, or you and your daughter will be off this property by morning." Sophia's hands went still on the folded linens. "Please. I don't have anywhere." "That is not my concern. My concern is this household. I'll speak to her. I promise, it won't happen again." Sophia's voice cracked slightly. "Please, Mrs. Whitmore. She's all I have." Mrs. Whitmore's expression didn't soften, but she didn't push further either, not yet. "One more time," she said. "That's all the warning you'll get from me." She walked away without knowing that Nate himself had already invited the girl back. That night, unable to sleep, Sophia sat on the edge of the cot in the carriage house and finally told the truth to Elena, one of the daytime maids who'd become the closest thing to a friend she had left. "He wasn't always like that," Sophia said quietly, her eyes on her sleeping daughter. "In the beginning he could be so kind. That's the thing nobody understands. It wasn't like a switch flipping. It was slow. A comment here. A rule there. By the time I understood what was happening, I didn't have anyone left to call for help. He made sure of that too. Is that why you left? Elena asked gently. Sophia's hand went, without thinking, to a thin white scar along her wrist, mostly hidden beneath her sleeve. I left because one night I looked at Lily and understood that if I stayed, she'd grow up thinking this was what love was supposed to look like. I couldn't let that happen to her. Whatever else happened to me. She didn't say the rest, that Marcus had a private investigator on retainer, that he'd already tracked down 2 of her previous jobs, that she changed her last name every time she moved and it never seemed to matter. She didn't know yet that somewhere across town, that same investigator had just placed a call to a payroll processing company that handled invoices for several Long Island estates, including Callaway Manor. 3 nights later, Nate woke to an empty nightstand. No flower. No thank you whisper. Just silence. He told himself it meant nothing. Children got tired. Children forgot things. But some part of him, the part that had spent 3 years flinching every time a phone rang late at night, knew that silence like this usually meant something was wrong. He got up. He walked the east corridor in his bare feet, the way he hadn't walked anywhere in his own home in years, and he heard it before he saw it. A small, muffled crying sound coming from the linen closet near the servants' stairs. He opened the door. Lily was curled up on the floor between 2 shelves of folded sheets, knees pulled to her chest, tears streaking her small face. "Hey," Nate said softly, crouching down. "Hey, it's all right. What happened?" "Mrs. Whitmore said I'm bad," Lily hiccuped. "She said Mama will lose her job because of me. I didn't mean to be bad. I just wanted to sit with the sad man again." Something in Nate's chest gave way completely. "You're not bad," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. "You have never once been bad. And you didn't do anything wrong by coming to see me." Lily blinked up at him, hiccuping. "You knew. You were awake." Nate hesitated. And then, because there had already been too many secrets in this house, and because this small crying girl deserved at least one honest answer, he said the thing he hadn't said to anyone. "I've been awake every single time, Lily. From the very first night." Her eyes went wide. "You knew. And you let me come back." "I did." His voice caught. "You were the first good thing that's happened in this house in 3 years. I wasn't ready to make it stop." Lily stared at him for a long moment with the unguarded, searching look only small children have, and then she threw her arms around his neck. Nate froze, then, slowly, carefully, like he was afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast, he hugged her back. He didn't hear the footsteps behind them until it was too late. Mrs. Whitmore stood in the corridor, phone in hand, staring at the sight of her employer, the most private, guarded man she had ever worked for, kneeling on the floor of a linen closet at 1 in the morning, holding a crying child in his arms. "Mr. Callaway," she said carefully, "there's something you need to know. And I don't think you're going to like it." Mrs. Whitmore's words hung in the cold hallway air. "There's something you need to know. And I don't think you're going to like it." Nate rose slowly, keeping one hand on Lily's small shoulder. "Then tell me." "The child has been sneaking into your room. Repeatedly. I gave her mother a warning 3 days ago." "I know," Nate said. Mrs. Whitmore blinked. "You know." "I've known since the first night." He said it plainly, without apology. "She wasn't sneaking in, Mrs. Whitmore. I let her stay. Every time." For a long moment, the head housekeeper said nothing at all. In 11 years, she had never once seen Nathaniel Callaway do something so far outside the rules he himself had written. "Sir, with respect, the board meets in 3 weeks. If word gets out that there's an unauthorized child living on the property, staff drama, a mother who..." "That's enough." His voice wasn't loud, but something in it made her stop. "Lily isn't a scandal, Mrs. Whitmore. She's a little girl who's cold and tired and just wants somewhere safe to be. We're going to find her that, tonight, in this house. Not a closet." He looked down at Lily, who was watching the two adults with wide, uncertain eyes. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you back to your mama." Sophia was frantic by the time they reached the carriage house, halfway through pulling on her coat to search the grounds herself. When she saw Nate carrying her daughter, wrapped in his own jacket, relief and terror crossed her face at the same time. "Mr. Calloway, I am so sorry, I'll have her things packed by." "You're not being let go," Nate said. "Either of you." Sophia stared at him like the words didn't make sense in her mouth. "I know you're hiding from someone," Nate went on quietly. "I heard enough of that phone call to understand that. I'm not going to ask you to explain everything tonight. But I want you to know this house is safer than you think, and I intend to keep it that way. For both of you." Sophia's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for 3 weeks. "Why would you do that? You don't know us." Nate looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder somewhere in the walkover, one small fist curled into his collar. "Because I think your daughter's been doing more for me than she knows," he said quietly. "It's the least I can do." The days that followed felt, to Sophia, like something out of a different life. Lily was given a proper room near the east wing, small, but warm, with a window that caught the morning sun. Nate arranged for a part-time nanny to watch her during Sophia's overnight shifts, an older, gentle woman named who'd raised 5 children of her own and had a bottomless supply of patience and lullabies. Mrs. Whitmore said nothing more about the rule. But she watched. And she worried. Nate found himself, for the first time in 3 years, coming down to breakfast at a reasonable hour instead of hiding in his study until noon. He found himself learning the particular way Lily liked her toast cut into triangles, not squares. He found himself, one evening, sitting on the floor of her new room building a tower out of blocks while she gave him detailed and entirely serious instructions on where each piece belonged. "You're not very good at this," Lily informed him. "I run a company with 4,000 employees," Nate said solemnly. "But you're bad at towers." "I'm bad at towers," he agreed, and found, to his own surprise, that he was smiling. Sophia watched from the doorway some evenings, arms crossed, half disbelieving what she was seeing. The cold, distant man the staff whispered about, the one who hadn't smiled at a company holiday party in 3 years, was sitting on a rug, wearing a paper crown Lily had made him, arguing gently about whether dinosaurs could also be princesses. It felt, for a few days, like the world had softened just slightly around the edges. It did not last. 200 miles away, in a small office above a strip mall dry cleaner, a private investigator named Russ Talbot hung up his phone and smiled for the first time in a month. Marcus Reyes had been paying him for 6 weeks to trace his wife's movements, and Russ had hit dead end after dead end, cash withdrawals, no forwarding address, a car sold for scrap value. Sophia Reyes had learned, the hard way, how to disappear. But everyone had to get paid eventually. And payroll left a trail. Russ had a contact at a bookkeeping firm that processed contractor invoices for a handful of Long Island estates, including, as of 3 weeks ago, a new name on the night staff roster at Calloway Manor, S. Reyes. He picked up the phone and called Marcus directly. "I think I found her," he said. "I need a little more to be sure. But I think I found her." Marcus Reyes did not look, on the surface, like a dangerous man. He wore good suits. He coached his nephew's little league team. He had, for 6 years, convinced nearly everyone in Sophia's life that he was patient, wounded, a man whose wife had cruelly abandoned him and taken his daughter for no reason at all. He believed this himself, mostly. That was what made him dangerous. "Find out everything," he told Russ. "Where she's working, who she's working for, what the arrangement is with the kid. I want it airtight before I move. This time, there's no running." Back at the manor, the fragile peace held for 1 more week. It was Sophia who first noticed the way Elena, her friend, and the daytime maid, had gone quiet and strange around her. How she wouldn't quite meet her eyes anymore. "Elena, what's wrong?" Elena hesitated a long moment before answering. "Mrs. Whitmore's been asking questions. About you." About the little girl's father. She had a phone call yesterday. I only heard part of it, but she mentioned your last name. And a man's name. Marcus. Sophia's blood went cold. What did she say? I don't know exactly. But she said something like, if the family needs to know his side of the story, I can make sure that happens. Sophia's hands began to shake. She understood immediately what Mrs. Whitmore had done, and why. The board vote. The scandal. A woman terrified of losing her carefully ordered household to gossip had decided the safest thing, for the estate, for her own position, was to make sure the father had a way back into the picture. Legitimate. Documented. No scandal, just a family reunion that would look, on paper, exactly like the right thing to do. She had no idea what she'd actually done. That night, Sophia found Mrs. Whitmore in her office. You called him, Sophia said, voice shaking. You told him where we are. Mrs. Whitmore's face didn't so much as flicker. I made an inquiry through a family law contact to ensure this household isn't harboring a custody dispute that could embarrass Mr. Calloway. That is my job. You don't understand what he is. Sophia's voice broke. You think this is about custody papers. It's not. It was never just about papers. For just a moment, something like doubt crossed Mrs. Whitmore's face. Then it hardened again. The papers are what matter in a court of law, Mrs. Reyes. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Sophia walked out before she said something she couldn't take back. She found Nate in his study near midnight and told him everything. The investigator, Marcus, the 6 years of careful, invisible cruelty that had never once left a mark anyone else could see, the divorce papers she had filed but never finished serving because she'd had to run before the court date. Nate listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening more with every sentence. His coming, Sophia finished, tears streaming freely now. Mrs. Whitmore practically drew him a map. He'll have a lawyer. He'll have witnesses who'll say he's a wonderful father. And her voice cracked completely. I never finished the divorce. Legally, he's still my husband. Legally, he still has a claim to her. Nate's hands curled into fists on the desk. Then we fight it. Properly. With real lawyers, not whoever Mrs. Whitmore's been calling. You don't understand. Sophia shook her head, desperate. If we fight and lose, I lose everything. If we run, at least I keep her a little longer before he finds us again. I've done it before. I can do it again. Sophia. I have to decide tonight. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Pack the car and disappear before he gets here. Start over somewhere he's never heard of. Or stay, and trust a legal system that's never once protected women like me, in a house where I've already been reported once by the person who's supposed to keep it running. She looked at Nate, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Calloway Manor, she let him see exactly how frightened she was. Tell me what to do, she whispered. Because I don't think I can choose alone anymore. Nate didn't answer right away. He knew better than to hand a decision like this to someone else. Not after watching a stranger's cruelty disguised as kindness nearly cost this woman everything once already. I won't tell you what to do, he said finally. But I'll tell you what I can offer, and you decide if it's enough to stay for. Sophia wiped her eyes, waiting. I have lawyers who handle things far more complicated than a custody dispute. Real ones. Not whoever Mrs. Whitmore called behind your back. If Marcus comes here with a claim, he'll be met with people who know exactly how these cases work and exactly how men like him operate. And if it's not enough, then I help you disappear properly this time. Not a suitcase and a prayer. A real plan, somewhere he'll never trace. Nate leaned forward. But Sophia, you've been running for 3 years on your own. You don't have to decide alone tonight. That's all I'm offering. Not a guarantee. Just, not alone. Sophia stared at him. At this man the whole staff whispered about as cold and unreachable, and something in her chest loosened just slightly, For the first time since she'd read Marcus's name in Mrs. Whitmore's crumpled call log. "Okay," she whispered. "We stay. For now." By morning, Nate had his head of legal, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Anand, on a video call from the city. "Walk me through everything," Priya said. "Every detail. Dates, documents, anything you filed." Sophia did, hands twisting in her lap the entire time. When she got to the part about the restraining order she'd tried to file 2 years earlier, Priya's expression sharpened. "You said it was dismissed." "The judge said there wasn't enough evidence. Marcus never left marks anyone could see. He was careful." Priya made a note. "That's actually useful information, in a strange way. A dismissed order still exists in the record. If we can show a pattern, multiple filings, multiple moves, multiple jobs, that tells its own story even without visible injuries. Judges are trained to look for exactly that kind of pattern now." For the first time, Sophia felt something other than fear. It was small and fragile, but it was there. Hope. That afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore requested a private meeting with Nate. She arrived stiff-backed, prepared for a fight, and was clearly unsettled to find him calm instead of furious. "I want to explain my reasoning," she began. "You don't need to. I already understand it," Nate said. "You were protecting the company. The board vote. Optics. Someone has to think about those things, sir. Especially now." "I know." Nate's voice was quiet, but firm. "And I understand why you did it. I don't think you're a bad person, Mrs. Whitmore. But you put a woman and a child in danger because you were more afraid of gossip than you were of what might actually happen to them. That's not a small thing. That's not something I can just pretend didn't happen." Mrs. Whitmore's composure cracked, just slightly. "I didn't know. I truly didn't understand what he was." "I know you didn't." Nate met her eyes. "But going forward, you'll understand this. This house protects the people in it. Staff included. All of them. That's the only rule that matters more than any board vote ever will." She nodded slowly, chastened in a way Nate had never seen from her before. "Understood, sir." It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it was a start. 2 days later, the board meeting Mrs. Whitmore had feared arrived early, moved up, in fact, by shareholders eager to catch Nate off guard. Rumors of a domestic situation at the manor had already begun to circulate, thin and half-formed, exactly the kind of thing that could tank a merger vote if left unaddressed. Nate stood in front of the boardroom, 12 pairs of skeptical eyes on him, and made a choice that surprised even himself. He didn't deny anything. "There is a woman on my staff who is fleeing an abusive marriage," he said plainly. "There is a 3-year-old girl who has become, in the last few weeks, the first good thing to happen in this house since my wife died. If that's a scandal to any of you, then I'd ask you to examine what exactly you think this company should stand for." Silence settled over the room. "I'm not asking your permission to help them," Nate continued. "I'm telling you it's already happening. The only real question in front of this board is whether you still want to work with a man who does the right thing even when it isn't convenient." One shareholder, an older man named Griggs who had been with the company since its founding, finally broke the silence. "Well," he said slowly, "I'll admit, Calloway, that's the most human I've seen you in 3 years." The vote, when it came, went in Nate's favor. Not unanimously, but enough. That evening, back at the manor, Nate finally told Sophia something he hadn't told anyone outside his own late-night thoughts. They sat on the back terrace while Lily and Dot played inside, the last light fading gold over the hedges. "I've always believed the accident was my fault," Nate said quietly. "Claire wanted to leave that dinner early. She was tired. I told her to stay another 20 minutes. I was closing a deal, I didn't want to leave in the middle of it. If she'd left when she wanted to, she wouldn't have been on that road at that exact moment." Sophia didn't say anything. She just listened, the way he'd listened to her the night before. "I never told anyone that," Nate went on. Not the therapist Mrs. Whitmore practically forced me to see. Not the board. I just built a wall around it and made a rule that no child would ever run through this house again, because I couldn't stand to imagine what our daughter would have sounded like, doing exactly that. Nate. Sophia's voice was gentle. That wasn't your fault. 20 minutes at a dinner isn't a reason a car crashes. I know that. Somewhere. But knowing it and believing it aren't the same thing. He looked at her. Lily's the first person who's made me feel like maybe I'm allowed to want something again. To care about someone again, without it being the thing that destroys me. Sophia reached over and took his hand, just for a moment. Then don't let him take that from you either, she said. Because I think he's going to try. As if summoned by the words themselves, Nate's phone buzzed on the table between them. It was Priya. He's filed an emergency motion, she said, without preamble, when Nate picked up. Marcus's lawyer is arguing immediate risk to the child if she remains in an unstable, unofficial household situation. They're asking for emergency temporary custody. A hearing's been scheduled, tomorrow morning. Nate's stomach dropped. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. And Nate, Priya's voice tightened. He's not doing this quietly. He's coming to the manor tonight. His lawyer already confirmed it. He says he has every right to see his daughter before the hearing, and legally, given the marriage is still valid, he's not entirely wrong. Nate looked across the table at Sophia, whose face had gone pale as she overheard enough of the call to understand. He's coming here, Nate said. Tonight. Sophia's hand tightened around his. Somewhere inside the house, faint and warm, they could hear Lily's laughter drifting through an open window, utterly unaware that the man she had never met but had heard whispered about in fragments of her mother's fear was less than an hour away. Headlights swept across the gravel drive at 9:15. Sophia stood at the tall windows of the front hall, arms wrapped around herself, watching the car she recognized instantly. The same silver sedan Marcus had bought the year they married, the one he'd always kept spotless, the way he kept everything spotless on the outside. You don't have to see him alone, Nate said, standing just behind her. I know. Her voice was steadier than she felt. But I do have to see him. If I hide from this one, he'll say that too, in court. That I ran instead of facing him. Priya had arrived 20 minutes earlier, along with a second lawyer specializing in family law, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Renata Cole. They stood a respectful distance back in the front hall, papers ready, watching the drive with the patient alertness of people who had done this before. Upstairs, Dot had Lily settled in her room with a nightlight and a stack of picture books, under strict instructions to keep her there no matter what she heard downstairs. The car door opened. Marcus Reyes stepped out in a pressed grey suit, exactly the kind of outfit a man wears when he wants a room to believe he is reasonable. He smiled when he saw Sophia through the glass. It was, Nate thought, the most unsettling thing he'd witnessed in years, a smile built for an audience, warm and wounded all at once. Sophia. Marcus's voice carried easily across the entry hall once the door opened. Gentle, almost tender. Baby, you look tired. I've been so worried. Don't, Sophia said quietly. Don't do that here. Marcus's eyes flicked to Nate, then to the two lawyers, and something behind his warm expression tightened, just slightly, before smoothing over again. I just want to see my daughter. That's all I've ever wanted, Sophia. You're the one who ran. I ran, Sophia said, and her voice, though it trembled, did not break. Because you told me once that if I ever tried to leave, you'd make sure no judge in the state believed a word I said. Do you remember saying that? Marcus's smile flickered. I don't know what you think you remember. I was hurt. People say things when they're hurt. You said it twice. Once in the kitchen, once in the car outside Lily's pediatrician's office. Sophia's chin lifted. I remember exactly where I was standing both times. Renata Cole stepped forward smoothly. Mr. Reyes, I'm one of the attorneys representing Mrs. Reyes's interests in tomorrow's hearing. I'd ask that any further conversation happen through counsel, not directly with my client tonight. Marcus's charm cooled by several degrees. I have a legal right to see my daughter. You have a right to petition the court, Renata said evenly. Which you've done. Tomorrow, a judge will hear both sides. Tonight, showing up unannounced at a private residence isn't a legal right, it's a choice. One the court may find relevant. For a moment, something flickered behind Marcus's eyes. Not quite anger, something colder and more careful, a man recalculating. I just want to see her, he said again, softer now, aimed less at the lawyers and more at Nate. One father to another, surely you understand that. Nate held his gaze. I understand wanting to see a child you love. What I don't understand is threatening the mother of that child so she's too afraid to ever say so out loud. Marcus's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about our marriage. I know enough, Nate said quietly. I know a 3-year-old girl snuck into my room every night for 2 weeks because my house was the first quiet, safe place she'd found in longer than I want to think about. That tells me plenty. The hearing was held the next morning in a modest courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Judge Marisol Ferrer, a woman with sharp reading glasses and an even sharper attention to detail, reviewed the emergency motion with visible patience. Marcus's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a devoted father unfairly separated from his daughter, a wife who'd vanished without explanation, an unofficial, unstable household where the child was reportedly found wandering the halls of a stranger's mansion at night. Nate felt his jaw tighten at that last part, as though Lily searching for warmth in a cold house was evidence against her mother, rather than a small, brave act of a child looking for comfort wherever she could find it. Then it was Renata's turn. She laid out the pattern, methodically, the way Priya had promised. The previous restraining order, dismissed not for lack of truth but for lack of visible evidence, a common and well-documented gap in how the courts had once handled cases exactly like this one. 3 jobs in 3 years, each one abandoned suddenly, each one traceable, if you looked closely, to a private investigator's paper trail. A pediatrician's records showing repeated late cancellations, always around the same days Marcus's own calendar showed him at home. None of these facts alone prove abuse, Your Honor, Renata said. Together, they show a pattern no reasonable person could call coincidence. Then Sophia spoke. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she went, describing not dramatic violence but the quieter kind. The isolation, the controlled finances, the small comments designed to make her doubt her own memory of her own life. She spoke about the night she looked at her sleeping daughter and understood, with total clarity, that if she stayed, Lily would grow up believing this was what love looked like. I didn't leave to hurt him, she said, looking briefly at Marcus, who sat rigid and expressionless beside his lawyer. I left so my daughter wouldn't learn that silence was supposed to feel like safety. Finally, Judge Ferrer turned to Nate. Mr. Calloway, you're not a party to this custody matter. Why are you here? Nate stood. Because I watched a 3-year-old girl find more comfort in an empty room with a grieving stranger than most children find in their own homes, Your Honor. I'm here because I believe what I saw, and I wasn't willing to stay quiet about it just because speaking up might cost me something. He didn't mention the board, or the merger vote, or the risk to everything he'd spent a decade building. It didn't feel like it mattered anymore. Judge Ferrer took a recess, and returned 40 minutes later with a ruling that felt, to Sophia, like the first breath of air after nearly drowning. The emergency custody motion was denied. A permanent protective order was granted, not just for Sophia but extending to Lily as well, along with a formal order requiring supervised, court-monitored visitation only. A process that would take months to even begin, pending a full psychological evaluation. Marcus's face, for the first time since he'd arrived at the manor, showed something other than careful performance. It showed the real anger underneath, quickly swallowed but not quite hidden fast enough. This isn't over, he said quietly to Sophia as the room emptied. It is for today, Renata said smoothly, stepping between them. And every day after this, you'll go through the court, Mr. Reyes. Not through her door. Marcus left without another word. Sophia stood very still until the courtroom doors closed behind him, and then, finally, allowed herself to cry, not from fear this time, but from something that had been held so tightly for so long it almost hurt to let go. Back at the manor that evening, Nate found Mrs. Whitmore in the study, waiting for him with an envelope in her hands. "My resignation," she said simply, before he could speak. "I understand if you want it. What I did put a child in danger. I let my fear of scandal outweigh my judgment, and I won't pretend that's a small mistake." Nate looked at the envelope for a long moment before setting it, unopened, back on the desk. "I'm not accepting this," he said. "You made a serious mistake, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But you've run this house with more care than almost anyone I know, for 11 years, and I think you're capable of understanding why what you did was wrong, really understanding it, not just apologizing for it." "I do understand," she said quietly. "I don't think I'll forget the look on that little girl's face in the courtroom photos for a long time." "Then stay," Nate said. "And help me build a house where fear of gossip never again outweighs someone's safety. That's the job now. Not just keeping the linen straight." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes glistened, just slightly, before she nodded and slipped the envelope back into her pocket. "Understood, sir." It wasn't the kind of forgiveness that erases what happened. It was the kind that says, "You're still capable of being better than your worst mistake." Nate had needed exactly that kind of forgiveness himself, once, for a 20-minute delay at a dinner table that had nothing at all to do with the road that took his wife from him. He understood, now more than ever, how much that kind of grace mattered. Autumn came slowly to Callaway Manor that year. Gold light stretching long across the lawns Nate had once kept silent on purpose. Lily started calling him Papa Nate sometime in October, without asking permission first, the way children do, simply deciding a thing was true and saying it out loud until the adults around her caught up. Nate remembered exactly where he was standing the first time she said it. In the kitchen, holding a plate of toast cut into careful triangles, the way she liked it. He hadn't trusted himself to speak for a full minute. Sophia finished her divorce that winter. Quietly, finally, completely, with no one left to threaten her into silence about it. She stayed on as staff for a little while longer, until one evening in early spring, sitting on the same back terrace where Nate had once confessed his oldest guilt, she told him she thought maybe it was time she stopped being the night housekeeper and started being something else entirely. Nate didn't ask what she meant. He simply reached for her hand, the way he had the night Marcus's headlights first swept up the drive, and this time he didn't let go. 2 years later, the house was never quiet anymore. Lily was 5 now, missing her 2 front teeth, running down the same east corridor where she'd once crept barefoot in the dark, except now she ran without fear, without hiding, her laughter bouncing off walls that had forgotten how to be silent. Mrs. Whitmore still ran the household with the same precision as ever, though she smiled more now, especially on the evenings she caught Lily helping fold linens, which mostly meant turning them into forts. On a warm evening at the end of May, Nate sat on the porch swing with Lily curled against his side, her small head heavy against his shoulder. Halfway through a bedtime story she was far too tired to finish hearing. "And the sad man wasn't sad anymore," Lily murmured, eyes fluttering shut, "because the little girl gave him her." She didn't finish the sentence. Her breathing evened out into sleep before the last word came. Nate looked down at her, this small, fearless person who had walked into his darkest room 3 years ago and simply refused to leave him alone in it, and felt something settle deep in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Sophia stepped out onto the porch a few minutes later, 2 mugs of tea in her hands, and sat down beside them without a word, watching the sun go down gold over the hedges Nate had once kept trimmed into perfect, lonely lines. "She's out," Nate whispered. "She usually is, by this part of the story." Sophia smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Some things are worth staying awake for, though. Even when you're only 3. Nate thought about that first night, lying perfectly still in the dark, pretending to be asleep, terrified of what it might mean to feel something again. He was glad, now that some part of him had stayed awake for it too. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments which moment hit you hardest: the paper flower, the linen closet, or the courtroom. And if you believe every child deserves a house that isn't afraid to be loud, share this story with someone who needs the reminder today.